So, what happens when someone who has built their entire life around controlling their body get a diagnosis that they didn't see coming? Like, that's exactly what happened to Bryan Johnson. He is a billionaire biohacker who has spent a whole lot of money trying to optimize nearly every part of his biology. Right? He tracks his sleep, his diet, his blood, hundreds of markers that most of us wouldn't even think to measure, let alone know even exist. And he spent an estimated $2 million a year in pursuit of his goal, right? He wants to slow down aging, maybe even reverse it. And in his words, he wants to beat it entirely. He said he wants to live to 160. And he's even talked about reaching immortality and soon by the year 2039. So he has some very lofty biological goals. And recently, just this past May, he revealed that he had been diagnosed with autoimmune gastritis, which is a chronic condition essentially where the immune system is attacking cells in the stomach lining. Um, Society in general have a whole lot of thoughts and opinions about this. And so before I go any further, I do want to make something very clear is like I'm going to share kind of my thoughts on the situation and whatnot. And I just want to preface all of that with I do not believe that he deserved this. I mean, I'd hope that this would go without saying, but I'm just trying to say it just so we're all very clear and on the same page so that nothing gets construed otherwise, because I do not believe that illness in any form is a punishment of any kind or, like I said, deserved at all. Don't believe that chronic diagnosis means that someone failed in some capacity, right? That they didn't think the right thoughts or was just somehow not like spiritually evolved enough, right? And when it comes to his condition, I have no idea if the protocol he was using contributed to it. From what he shared, he believes that his diagnosis may be connected to a process that began a whole long time, a long time ago before this protocol even existed. And it's very possible that all of this extensive testing that he's been doing is what ultimately helped him identify his disease to begin with. So, all that said, this is not a commentary against biohacking and also not an argument against science, medicine, testing, any of that. I'm very much in favor of using all the tools available to care for our bodies. What I do want to talk about is something that Bryan said a few weeks after he revealed his diagnosis. He shared something that just really caught my attention. And he basically said that he'd been thinking things over, reflecting as one does when they get a diagnosis like this. And he wondered if maybe he had taken the whole longevity project too far. Now, I don't know what he meant to say by that, right? Whether he was referring to, his diagnosis or his specific protocols, if he was maybe addressing the public scrutiny he was getting, could have been something else entirely, not sure. Um, but just even hearing him ask that question opened up the door to this conversation that I've believed for a long time and so kind of want to share. Because I believe that there are basically two fundamental energies involved in just the way that we engage in life. There's the masculine energy, right? Logical, analytical, very structured and action oriented, right? It likes those frameworks and those protocols, and it likes to measure things. This is what Bryan's entire approach is, like all the biopsies, the blood draws, et cetera, right? It's brilliant, it's disciplined, right? And it's also kind of at its core like this attempt to make the body behave like this through the sheer force of will. Okay, so there's the masculine. And then there's also the feminine energy, right? It's more creative and intuitive. Like this is more of the not doing. It doesn't divide things and measure them in order to understand them, right? It synthesizes things. It knows things. And so this is more of the energy of surrender or trust, right? Of listening to something like inside of you. And these are the kinds of things that just don't show up. They can't really be quantified. They don't show up like on a lab report. So you have the masculine, you have the feminine. These energies are polarities, right? We know this. They're very different. They operate in different ways. But they're not enemies. That one isn't better than the other. We need both. But in our society, we tend to prioritize that masculine energy. right? And it has done some wonderful things for us. That masculine energy has built medical systems and technologies and treatments. And all of those things have saved and extended countless lives. The feminine energy, on the other hand, it's what connects us to like that intelligence of the whole. And that's harder to quantify, right? And that includes dimensions of our own experience that, like I said, can't be reduced to data. And so the problem that we sometimes see in society is that we really lean on the masculine side of that polarity, thinking that that is going to get the job done in and of itself. And when I look at Bryan's project, I see like an extraordinary expression of that masculine energy in measuring everything, controlling every variable, like creating that optimal protocol. And he follows it with like that just very relentless discipline with the goal of, like I said, engineering the body beyond aging and death. And so when I say that, like, I'm not like mocking that ambition. There's something very bold and brilliant about it. And the fact that he's doing this experiment just like so publicly is pretty courageous, right? I think that there will probably be discoveries that emerge from this research that profoundly change what's possible for humans and for our health. But like I said, I feel like there's this deeper question beneath this project. And I think that question is about control. And I think we do this, whether we do it consciously or not, like, you know, can we control enough to remove the uncertainty of being human? And that's ultimately the question. And I think it's an important one because you and I aren't that different from Bryan. We are likely doing something very similar to him in some corner of our lives right now. And I'll come back to that in a second because I before I just want to step back a bit and say like I agree with Bryan. I actually believe we can extend human life very dramatically, like far beyond what we currently consider as normal. I don't know if that means living to 160 like Bryan wants to, or if it's 300 or 500, like I don't know. And then when it comes to immortality, I mean that's a whole other topic, right? Like I don't know if that's possible. I don't even know if that's desirable. But I do believe that we have just barely begun to understand human consciousness and then the relationship that that has with what we believe and what we feel and how all of that connects to what we then ultimately experience physically, right? I also believe that there is a limit to how far that masculine approach can take us on this longevity front. I think that if we are able to extend human life as dramatically as I believe may be possible, I don't think that we're going to get there through that physical intervention alone, not with that masculine, right? Like that more data, more control energy. I believe that we get there by remembering who we are. Like we are creators. We are part of the divine, like that, the same energy that creates worlds. I think about that. The same energy that creates entire worlds is operating inside of us. Like most of us have just simply forgotten how to access it. At least, consciously and on purpose. I believe it's the fear that contracts our access to that creative intelligence. And then on the other hand, trust and inner alignment allows more of that to flow through us. So not to say that trust is going to just make us invulnerable and will guarantee our physical our physical health, but like I said, I just don't think biology and consciousness are as separate as we have been taught to believe. So then when we go down this line of reasoning, I think that it raises another question, right? Like okay, Melissa, if we are creators and consciousness and biology are so like connected, then why do our bodies still become sick? And I don't have a complete answer for that, but I do have beliefs about the things that do contribute to it. And there are a whole bunch. I'm not going to share all of them, but I do think that sickness and disease come from a few key places. And I think unprocessed emotion is a huge piece of it, right? Like the things that we end up holding in our bodies instead of moving them through our bodies. Think grief that we haven't grieved, or anger that we've essentially swallowed because, well, for whatever reasons, maybe it wasn't safe to feel it, or maybe we didn't feel it was appropriate, or what, there are a million different reasons. So all of that grief, all that anger, all those emotions, all that has to live somewhere. And often, if it isn't processed, it ends up living in the body. And now I'm not saying this to say that every disease has like this single emotional cause or anything like that. And I'm definitely not going to diagnose Bryan or his emotional life, right? Claiming to know what caused his condition. Um, Also don't think that, medical treatment should be replaced with like spiritual work. Um, but you can believe that the physical body deserves medical care while also believing the body carries more than just that physical information, right? I don't believe that those two ideas cancel each other out. Um, and like I said, I believe there's something deeper. I believe much of humanity lives inside the illusion of death. And by that, I don't mean that death itself, like bodies dying is the illusion. Like bodies clearly change and deteriorate, right? They eventually stop functioning. But what I mean is that we've come to identify ourselves so completely with the body that we experience its ending as the ending of who we are. And it's that belief where our enormous fear comes from. Remember that fear that contracts, that limits our ability to access that higher self? So what we end up doing is we end up building our lives around avoiding death. I mean, we have entire industries around postponing it. Bryan is a classic example of this. And we do it in a thousand different ways. We're pursuing that youth, right? The fountain of youth, certainty, achievement, health, money, status. Like there's so many things. And often it's because some part of us believes that if we can just secure enough of that, then we will be safe. But if we are more than the body, then, which I believe we are, then perhaps death isn't the annihilation that we imagine it to be. We can't be destroyed. We are energy. And while energy can definitely change forms, it cannot be destroyed. So what I think is happening is that our need to control is coming from the fear that occurs when we forget who we are. That's what I believe. Now you don't have to agree with me, but I think it's something worth contemplating. And so, and then this is where it kind of comes back. We circle back to, you and me, because like I said earlier, we're doing this too. In some version in our lives, we're like Bryan. We're trying to control. Maybe we're not spending $2 million a year on blood panels, but I would bet that you've got some version of this running in your own life. A relationship that you're trying to fix with like more effort instead of more presence. Maybe it's a business that you're trying to like force into growth, right? Instead of trusting what, actually wants to move through you. Maybe you're treating your body like a project like Bryan, trying to discipline it in some way into obedience. Maybe your version of $2 million a year is more of like the enormous amount of like mental and emotional energy that you spend, trying to make sure that nothing unexpected happens, trying to account for all the possibilities. And I get it. I understand why we do it. I do it too. With that control can feel like safety. It feels familiar. Collecting all that data can give us that temporary relief of believing that, that if we just know enough, if we just prepare enough, then we'll be able to, prevent some form of pain. But life doesn't work like this. We know this, right? We can deeply care for our bodies and still become ill. We can build strong businesses and still experience failure, right? We can do everything we know to do and still encounter something that we just did not and could not anticipate. And so when we finally recognize that an action can influence an outcome but never actually guarantee it, then we arrive at a choice, right? We can either, tighten our grip, try even harder to control like what happens next, or we can begin to understand surrender. We can loosen that grip. And I know, for better or worse, probably for worse, surrender is often misunderstood, right? It's more often construed as a passivity, but it's not. It's not like refusing treatment or abandoning discipline, right? You don't have to ignore the data. You don't have to eliminate the masculine energy. Surrender is more releasing the idea that your actions must guarantee the outcome or will guarantee the outcome because there is no guarantee. Okay, so it's taking that thoughtful action while remaining in relationship with your intuition, right? Your emotions in your body, something larger than just your intellect. Because like I said, the masculine and the feminine are needed together, right? The masculine can intervene, the feminine can receive. Together they create something more that neither could really produce on its own. So, this kind of brings me back to Bryan because I don't think the answer is for him to abandon the masculine energy that he has driven all of his work up until now. I think the opportunity is to allow the feminine intelligence into the process too. So I hope Bryan continues his work. Like I said, he may discover something through this that ends up helping millions of people. I want him to continue his work and continue asking those more masculine questions that he's asking. And I hope he opens up to a different kind of inquiry as well, right? To ask those more feminine energy questions. So not just like, how do I fix this? Or how do I, design that next intervention? But also ask, you know, what's my body communicating beyond the numbers, right? What might be available if I listen to my body just as much as I'm measuring it? But like I said at the start, this video isn't really about Bryan. It's about you and I and that metaphorical $2 million a year that we're all spending in one form or another, trying to control the uncontrollable in our health, our businesses, our relationships, right? Trying to control instead of asking what it might feel like to just trust something bigger, to invite the feminine and surrender. So where in your life are you trying to control, right? Where are you trying to biohack your way to your goal? And what if you just loosened your grip just a little, made some space to trust life to move through you for your highest good? Something to consider. Until next time. Bye-bye.